Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Beyond Max Q. I'm your host, Mollie Jahner. I am joined today by Phillip Shoemaker, who is the executive director of identity.com, but that's not all. He has quite the fantastic career, creator of the Apple Store, among many things. And so I just want to everybody take a seat, listen into this one because I think it's going to be a really great interview. So with that, Philip, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Molly. Appreciate it. Yeah, as you said, I'm currently the executive director of identity.com, which is kind of this forward-thinking company. It's a 501c4 nonprofit focused on delivering high quality digital identities for people at a low price. That was our intention when we launched it. And the reason I got focused on identity was for a variety of reasons. One is, look, I've been in this industry for a long time, online for a long time, and what I loved back in the day was the anonymous nature of the internet. Right? You could get any information you wanted. There was no repercussions. Nobody could track what you were doing, and to me that was good. It was this freedom of information piece. And then I started seeing things go awry when I started the App Store. When I first joined Apple to help build out the App Store, create the processes, understand who our developers were, understand what the users wanted, I started seeing kind of little, I don't know, holes in the armor, if you will, or at least in the walls of what I thought was freedom online, because suddenly you get developers who saw the App Store as an ATM machine where they could make a lot of money. And some developers made a lot of money in that space, but others saw it as a way to let me see how I can defraud and scam the users. And
Right.
for me, that was one of the big problems. And at the time, Apple was simply grabbing information like username, email address, things like that. And anyway, so I'll go into more stories along those lines, but it was things like that. And then also being the head of the App Store, once my name got out there, I got hacked, I got SIM swapped, I got stalked, I got death threats, just because people knew information about me. And they knew that because they could get it off the dark web. And
Mhm.
so in 2016, after I left Apple, I started noodling on what I wanted to do next, and fixing the identity problem was a big one. And
Uh,
so in 2018, we founded identity.com with Vinny Lingham. And the interesting thing about that is I was like, yeah, decentralized identity is just a few years away. It's 2025, and I'm saying the same thing still. It is just 5 years away, and
yes.
it's going to continue to do so because it's just more cumbersome, right? To be honest, it's more cumbersome to use. But I love this space. I love identity and trying to figure out who people are online. But at the same time, I want people to be able to show who they are online without exposing all the information. This idea that you go to a website and you have to scan your driver's license, that's insanity.
Oh,
I don't
man.
ever want to do that. But we have a solution that stores it on your device only, and you only share what you need with the people you need to share it with. And that's kind of the interesting thing that we're doing. So we're plugging away, trying to get more users on board, et cetera. But it's a startup, and it's a long slog for sure.
Well, 2016, I mean, 2018 is when you founded it. I think there's kite surfing in there somewhere, wasn't there? I remember that
Yeah.
like in our previous conversation, which I always like was like, wow, that's actually pretty fantastic. Let's just stay there at the kite surfing stage. But I would love to talk about, like, I mean, that's actually kind of a long startup. Like, I mean, 2018 to now, right? So you've got to have a ton of advice and thoughts on what that journey looks like. I'd love for you to share a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of stories there. I think some of the interesting ones, or the most important ones are, you go when you start a company like Identity. For me, it was all about this idea of these decentralized identities. DIDs is what they're called. It's a standard, the DID standard. And I just went into the space saying, well, we got to support this standard. To me, there was no question about it. And I think that was a problem. You should question everything, right? When you're doing this, because for me, the DID was a standard that everybody, I was thinking in 5 years, 10 years, everybody would have DIDs and you'd be able to share them. And these DIDs are a way of storing your data. It's not stored up on the blockchain. It's stored on your device. It's stored on something that you control, but you can share pieces of it with people, and it's cryptographically secure. I mean, there's a lot of reasons around it. But look, part of this problem with standards is they're always changing, they're always evolving, and in often cases, nobody accepts them. Right.
Yeah.
So you've got all these decentralized identity companies working on DIDs and verifiable credentials when all you really want is a product that works.
Uh-huh.
And you can create your own cryptographic standard internal to your company and have all the same functionality and have it reusable by creating a bunch of APIs and zero knowledge proofs and things like that. But the bottom line is there are assumptions you make when you create a business, and you should never assume. You should do a lot of digging into it and really understand the use case.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, and I love the name. So identity, and I kind of take a minute to go a little deeper and, okay, your identity as a founder, right? So you have your company and what that looks like and you're protecting it, but then how have you, I mean, like I said, you've had such a career, how have you almost re-identified in this startup space, and what that looks like for you?
Funny question. I think it's a difficult thing because I'm asked to speak on many topics, mostly surrounding Apple all the time.
Right.
And so it's really difficult for me to extricate myself
Right.
from that whole Apple ecosystem. I mean, if you go on my LinkedIn today, these last 3 days, I've been posting a lot about the Apple changes, et cetera, just
Right.
because I think it's important to get that education out there. But look, well, I think one of the interesting things, I was on Twitter early on, right? 2009, 2008, I think. And I tweeted something when I was
Good
running
days.
the App Store, and Apple came down on me hard, right? Apple came
Really?
down on me hard. Developers came at me. I had a Wired article about something I posted. And it was at that point I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm not doing any of this social media stuff. And so I got myself out of it. And so I never really had a personal brand, a personal following, etc. The whole time I was at Apple, right? The funny thing about Apple is when I joined, Greg Joswick, he's known as Jaws, he's executive VP of marketing. Jaws says to me, he's like, Philip, we have no room for ego here. There's only one rock star, and his name is Steve, right? And he's down the hall. And so everybody was made to just wipe their ego and not build a personal brand. And so for me in 2016, when I left Apple and I went to the Dominican Republic and kite surfed for many months, I was trying to figure out the next thing to do. And that's when we started Identity. And I realized I need to get out there. I need to start building a brand. And I tell you, it's one of the hardest things to do is building a
It is.
brand around your own personal identity. And I'd say to people in 2016, 2017, no, I'm not talking about Apple. I want to talk about new stuff. Let's talk about blockchain. Let's talk about crypto. Let's talk about identities. And but I just keep getting dragged back into it. And I've come to peace with that now because I understand that was a pivotal time. And a lot of the stuff that we built at Apple is critical still to this day. And I think one of the interesting things that we did at Apple there was to make it about self-regulation. Apple's going to review these apps. We're going to regulate them. We're going to tell you what's allowed and what's not allowed. And for the most part, we kept the government away from our door, right? Trying to get in and regulate. I testified with so many different places. So for about why Apple needs to control the ecosystem, but it's gone too far now. And now, so I'm starting to get out there more and speaking out against Apple in certain ways of saying, look, you've got to open the doors, open the kimono a little bit, share more with developers. And so for me, my personal brand has evolved from this Apple guy into
Mhm.
something that's more about consumer protection and ways to do things online without divulging too much information. And so I'm moving into that security area. But I tell you, it's still hard, right? It's a real difficult thing, and still I'm known mostly, especially even by my friends, as the Apple guy, and that's maddening because it's so much more to it, right? I'm involved in so many different ventures, but identity and safeguarding us and our children online to me is one of the biggest things I want to work on.
It is. I think that's tremendously important. Honestly, I think I get nervous every time we go to like a Whole Foods and they have the scan your
Yeah,
hand to pay. I'm like, I'm not doing that. And maybe that makes me a little bit provincial, but I feel like, I don't know, I'm more old school that way in that sense because it makes me really nervous, right? You don't
it
know
really does.
who's going to get access to that. At some point, you see leaks and hacks and things all the time. And I mean, that's scary. I
Well,
think.
look, I think you're spot on there, and I think too many people don't think about that. It's I got in when I started really thinking about identity, and I started thinking about how I pull out my driver's license. Anybody that asks for it, I show it to them. Right? You go to a bar, you have to show it. When you buy alcohol, when you do anything, you go to a dispensary, whatever. You go to a club, you have to show them your driver's license. And imagine, I mean, I'm an older male, but if I was a younger woman and I'm showing this to some bouncer at a bar, little do you, I mean, everything is on there: your address, your age, your name, your birth date.
Everything.
There are things there that they can steal your identity from, but also they could track you down. And when I started thinking about that, about when this data gets hacked,
Hmm.
what are they going to have on me? And as we know, it's been hacked so many times. And now you're talking about biometrics, the palm print,
Yes.
your face print, your
And
scan,
that
your
makes me
iris.
really nervous.
Terrifying, right? We don't want that stuff to get out there, right? I'm a believer that, that in the future there's going to be ways of reading our DNA
Hmm.
without doing a drop of blood, and that terrifies me because I think it was years ago I read a book, a science fiction book, where they talked about a weapon that can be engineered to track down someone and assassinate them by DNA. So imagine you got something up in space that's trying to
Yeah.
track somebody and they just send it down to you. To me, this stuff happens, right? It's
Yes.
not totally insane to think about this. And so I'm super terrified by that. Identity.com, oddly enough, we use something called a fully homomorphic encryption, which
Okay.
allows people to, if they steal that data stream, if they get access to your biometric data stream, they can't replay it, they can't do any work with it because
Okay.
it's fully encrypted. But we can do work with it because we know the encryption key, and so we can do work with the encrypted data stream. And it's a really interesting thing. It is seen as the holy grail as far as biometric security is concerned. And we use a company called Private ID to do this work, and it's phenomenal. And so that will store that'll save things. But the palm print, they're not doing full
I know
homomorphic
it makes me
encryption.
nervous for the next generations. Well, I would love to hear about, I mean, you're doing so many cool things. What does this next year look like for you and your company? And as a founder, what does it look like as you kind of evolve your voice and your personal brand too? I'd love to hear like what your goals are and how you're focused on that.
Well, it's an interesting time to ask me that question. If you asked me a year ago, I'd say we're slogging away with our decentralized IDs and our verifiable credentials. And look, we're still doing that work. Identity, I think identity, I've come to this realization that identity is a lot bigger than your legal identity, right? The thing that's on your passport and your driver's license. To me, it's more about even your likeness, your look and feel, the way you act. There's three concepts of identity. One of them is your legal identity, one of them is your social identity, and one is your personal identity. And for me, that social identity is super critical, but personal identity as well. That includes the way I look
Yeah.
and the way I sound, right? This lookness and
Well, the
sound of
deep
mine.
fakes, right? I mean, that comes after a
Exactly.
lot of those things.
So we're doing I don't want to say a pivot because we're still focusing on these decentralized identities because we have customers in that space, but we're going to open the door a little bit to something that I wouldn't even call it identity adjacent. I think it's right in there, and that's deep fake protection. There needs to be a way for us to be able to protect ourselves, right, online. And as we know, it's just going to get worse and worse. And these open AI and all these other AI systems, generative AI systems that are creating these images
Mhm. They're
and
doing really
videos, they
good.
look just like us and they
Yep.
sound just like us, and it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think what you're doing is tremendously important. So for the founders in the audience who are maybe just getting started, do you have any like failures or amazing tips? Or sometimes I think we learn best from our failures, but maybe you don't have any of those. And if you don't, any success tips or anything that you feel like you want to share with them?
Yeah, I looked a lot of failures. I think people still are. I know in the founder space, this is hurt a lot, but we got to fail a lot in order to find success. And I'll say that the first 5 years of identity.com, we failed a lot. We were going after markets. Like a great example was people are super afraid of digital identity. We know that they're afraid of putting their ID online, but then COVID came along, right? And COVID was one of these things. It's like, oh my God, makes perfect sense to have a COVID credential, a credential that says I've received it, so I have the antibody, or I have I got COVID on this date, and so I have antibodies in there, or I got the shot, I got the booster, et cetera. And these are critical data points that you could store in your on your wallet on your phone to be able to prove to people that you're immune or that you've been vaccinated. But but the COVID thing hit so hard and so fast that governments immediately just started building their own stuff. They immediately started building rather than using third parties. And so what ultimately happened is that while many of us were toiling away, creating a new version of our app to be able to do this, Apple and Google said, no, we're not going to allow these apps on the store unless they come from the government. And that was one of these big kind of gotchas in this space. And so it's great to run fast and loose, but
Right.
when you're on this edge of regulated area, you got to be super careful because you're going to just throw good money after bad trying to build something that no one's ever going to use. We built a lot of stuff for the COVID credential and ultimately had to throw it all away because nobody wanted it. They couldn't use it. And so it's important for you to, I hate, I said this earlier as well about doing your market research on standards and creating standards, but standards are not as important as like you got things like the Bluetooth standard and the Wi-Fi standard. I get it; those are really critical. You gotta implement those. But when it comes to things that are like groundbreaking, standards I think are not the way to go. You should focus on your product market fit, create use cases that or create a product that fits the use cases that your customers want, and then back into some standards over time if you need to. But for me, stay away from standards and focus on just giving the customer what they need.
Yeah. Well, and I like your earlier statement, question everything. So why
Exactly.
is the standard here? Is there something we need? Do we need to think through this? Like, I love that. So all tied into a neat bow with like question everything,
Right.
which is
Exactly.
good. Well, is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you'd like to share today? I just want to make sure we give you space to be able to talk about what you'd like to talk about as well.
I think it's a thrilling time to be somebody working, a founder in a startup working on software or any sort of software services. The AI revolution is on us, and it's giving the ability for someone to have no coding experience to be able to sit down in a product like Replit or one of those and just be able to, what are the other ones? There's a handful of these, but Replit is one. But being able to just explain to it the type of product you want, and then you can interact with it like an engineer and be able to get a proof of concept out in a matter of days. And the UI can be good, et cetera. You don't need to spend a lot of money to build a proof of concept, which to me is huge. It's a big change from where it was just a year ago. And so I encourage everyone to give these AI tools a chance to be able to help them build things, to be able to get it off the ground. And then you can start running Google ads to see if people are interested in it, if they're going to come to your website and start using it. You can start getting really good feedback from it. So for me, look, the AI revolution, while it's scary, on the other hand, it's super. To me, it's not eliminating positions in my team. It's helping empower us to be able to create so much more. And so, to me, it's the superhuman effect, and I think that's what we're going to see over the course of the next few years. Now, jobs will be lost. We know that over time, but right now, as a founder, this is such a great time to be alive, to be able to integrate and work with this stuff.
Mhm. Well, I would also say that I think jobs will be created because there's going to be a need for people who understand it and can do it and use
That's
it.
right.
So that's there's always it's kind of like when accounting, like QuickBooks and all these things came about for bookkeeping, and it was like it doesn't necessarily mean jobs lost. It just means you need to know how to use the tools that are at hand.
Exactly.
Well said. We always end with my favorite question, which is, what are you currently reading?
Yeah, that's great. I'm currently reading this book called "There's No Such Thing as Crypto Crime." Uh,
Okay.
it's an interesting book because it's all about that crypto crime shouldn't be called out of standard bank crime and other things, financial crimes in general. It's just a financial crime. So that's a great book. But look, I'm this guy that reads multiple books at once,
Okay.
and I'm reading that. The other one is called Good Energy from Casey Means, which is all about how to improve what you're eating, improve your metabolism,
Oh,
and
yes.
some really groundbreaking stuff that she's doing there, but ways to help keep your insulin from spiking and other things like
Yes.
that, sugar
Oh,
from
super
spiking.
interesting. I love
I think
that.
it's good. For me, look, I think one of the things I always like to do is I like to train like an athlete. And I don't mean physically train, but if I'm a software engineer, you should
Uh-huh.
always be reading, but you should also be taking care of your body. So I think it's really important to be able to always be reading, always be learning.
Uh-huh.
And so for me, I always read multiple books at once, and one's always health related, or maybe something that empowers me emotionally, and then others are all technical.
I love it. That's a great suggestion. I'll link everything in the video description. And
All
then,
right.
obviously your links too, and identity.com. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. He is available. And I think what he's building is really transformational. And I would hardly call it a startup. I think at this point, you've earned the title of being, you're established at this point, especially starting in 2018. You went through COVID and all those things. But it's been a true pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Molly. Appreciate it.